Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Xoey Thomas Lang. I am a production potter and ceramics teacher based in Brooklyn, New York. Today I'm going to be doing a video about centering your clay on the wheel. How to center your clay on the wheel. All of the crap that you can run into that will stop you from centering your clay on the wheel. And hopefully this will help in your foundation of wheel ceramic. To make this video as structured as possible, I'm going to break this into sections. Number one being necessary elements in order to successfully center your clay. Number two being problems you may be having, things that you are doing wrong that is stopping you from getting your clay centered, or maybe you centered your clay and then you messed up after the fact and now your clay is off center, which can definitely happen. Things can go wrong at any point in the process, so heed the advice in this video. The first thing that needs to happen when you throw your clay down on the wheel is that you make sure it is already relatively in the center. There are lines on your wheel that will show you where the center of the wheel is, and your clay, which should be round as well, you're aiming for the center of the circle. If you smack it down into the center and you got it wrong, before you turn on your wheel, before you put your water on, before you put your hands on your clay, move your clay further into the center. If you have a thicker side of the circle that's showing, make it an even space around the clay and the circle of the wheel. You want to make sure that your clay is turning around itself when you turn the wheel on versus drawing a circle. If one point of it is drawing a circle, stop your wheel, move it closer towards the center, turn your wheel on, and continue. The next element is your speed of your wheel. While we're trying to center, we want to make sure that your speed is at a relatively high speed. If you go too slow, any movement you make that's subtle, the clay will pick up on it, and it's not going fast enough in order for you to get things done. You're using the centrifugal force of the wheel in order for your movement, your slow movement, and your proper amount of pressure in order for those elements to be applied for the clay to listen to you. If it is going too fast, you will not be in control. A lot of wheels go way faster than necessary. So unless you know your wheel, and unless you know your wheel is slow, do not floor your wheel. Set it to a speed that is medium high, I'd say, for the standard wheel. And then you can continue. The next element. How far away are you from your wheel? Is there a decent amount of space in between your body and the wheel? If there is, I like to tell people to take their stool, make sure there's no space in between the stool and the wheel so that your body is quite literally up against, straddling the wheel. You want your legs at a 90-degree angle. Your legs can squeeze in on the splash pan. Your elbows will be tucked into your body, braced on your thighs. If there is space between your elbows and your thighs, you're gonna have an issue with controlling the clay. The clay will control you. So make sure you brace and make sure you sit in a comfortable position close enough to the wheel so that your body parts can be in the right place they need to be in relation to the clay. We've got one more element before we get started. We've made sure that we're sitting close. We've made sure that our speed is right. We've made sure that our clay is in the middle of the wheel already. Now we have to make sure that the clay is adhered. We threw it down, that's great. Maybe you smacked it down, that's awesome. But there's still those little edges that are lifting up potentially. So the first thing we do is when we turn our wheel on medium-high speed, wetting your clay, wetting both of your hands as well, elbows connected to thighs to brace, you will cup the clay to apply downward pressure. This is going to make sure that your clay is fully adhered to the wheel. And when we do our next step of coning up, which is applying upward pressure, there's no chance of the clay coming off of the wheel and like kind of sliding off and detaching from the wheel head. When we cup the clay, we want to make sure that our hands are cupped kind of like we're trying to catch a bug on the floor. Like we want to make sure that our thumbs are touching, because the thumbs is where your pressure will be coming from. You're going to lean forward, engage your arm muscles. Your pressure from your upper body will be going down into your arms and into your thumb muscles, which are on top of the clay, applying pressure downwards. That's a quick step. That's really all it is. You're not trying to flatten the clay down. You're not really even trying to center it at this point. You're just trying to adhere it to the wheel, apply some downward pressure, get your hands used to touching the clay. During this point, it's possible that your water that you applied will dry up and it will stick to your hands, and you'll feel some friction and heat. If that happens, slowly release. take your sponge and wet it again. The most effective way to wet your clay is by taking your sponge and squeezing it over your clay. You do not need to squeeze all of what's in the sponge onto the clay. If you do that, all of what's in your water bucket will end up in your splash pan, and it will be super hard to clean because your splash pan will be full of water, and that's just not necessary. Apply just enough water to cover the surface area of the clay, put it back, and continue. Okay, now we're ready to center. Yay! Awesome. So to center, we're going to use a method called coning up. Just a exclaimer, is that the word? I've not ever used that word in my life. Just so you know, this is how I personally center. A lot of potters center a lot of different ways. Not everyone cones up. It's not 100% necessary that you cone up. Personally, I did not understand centering or learn how to center successfully until I learned how to cone up. As soon as you get the clay up there, coning down is when the centering happens. No. Coning down is when the centering happens. To get the cone back into a puck, the pressure that you have to apply both inwards and downwards from your dominant and your non-dominant hand. I did not know what pressure should be coming from where until I learned how to cone up. So I think it's very effective. It helps a lot of beginners understand how to center. In my classes that I teach, most of my students will center clay on their first time, something that took me a damn year to learn how to center once. So when I teach beginners, I like to tell people to keep their hands parallel to each other instead of curving in. If we do the diamond hands, that tends to have people kind of put their pressure by squeezing inwards like this, which is not necessarily wrong. And when I cone up now, I do something similar, but in order to get people to understand what is necessary and where the pressure needs to be coming from, I tell them hands straight, thumbs up to the ceiling. The clay is in the middle of your palms from the wrist to the pinky knuckle. We're just using this bottom pad of the palm, making sure your clay is wet, squeezing your hands towards each other until you start to see the clay move. Our elbows are braced at this point. Your arm muscles are engaged. That is how we will squeeze our hands closer. And if you do not apply enough pressure, the clay will not move. So if your clay is not moving, apply more pressure. Before you start to bring your hands upwards, make sure your clay is already pushing up from your hands moving closer together. Your hands do not have to be pushing downwards onto the wheel head. We don't want our hands to scrape on the wheel head. There can be just enough space for your hands to be comfortable sliding on the wheel head without any pain to your hands. After your clay starts to move, your hands are going to draw upwards and inwards towards each other and also at the same time towards your face until they meet in a prayer position on top of the cone. These bottom pads of the palms, that's where our pressure is coming from, squeezing our hands towards each other. If your bottom pads of the palms don't come to touch at the end, you're gonna end up with a tall, flat cylinder situation. We wanna make sure that it tapers at the top, applying more pressure towards the top to get that cone shape. So now we've done our first cone pass, we gotta do another one. Likely it's still too wide on the bottom, so I'm gonna squeeze it in one more time. When we squeeze it in one more time, it's less about the bottom pads of the palms coming to touch at the top again. It's more so about the distribution of weight of the cone. So your weight in your hands, your pressure in your hands comes more so towards the top of your palm than the pressure solely being at the base. You're kind of distributing the weight in an even way. The reason we don't want to bring it all the way up to the top again is because the top of the cone can get a little too pointy and there's no point for it to get that thin. We want the tip to be proportionate to the rest of the piece. And I know you know what it looks like, and yes, that's the shape that we're going for. So the shape of your cone can tell you where you're applying your pressure. If it's top heavy, if it's got lumps in the center, you know, all these things, they're not wrong. Your cone doesn't necessarily have to be proportionate because like I said, the centering does not happen until we're coning down. But, you know, as you do it, as you practice, you will get it more proportionate just because, you know, there's no reason to have a lumpy cone. Okay, no. Coning down. To cone down, your dominant hand will be in a karate chopping shape. So for this, we want the tip of the cone in the center of the same pad of the palm we just used to cone up. We want to make sure we're not using our knuckle, and we want to make sure we're not using our wrist. It's the middle, this flat angle of the palm muscle right on top of the tip of the cone. Your non-dominant hand, elbow will be tucked in wrist will be broken. So your heel of your wrist will be in an L shape. You will be pushing away from your body towards the center of the wheel. It is very important that there is no space in between your two hands. So if you have one at the top of the cone and one at the bottom of the cone, bring that non-dominant hand up to the top of the cone. The idea is that you're applying pressure only to the top of the cone, downwards with that dominant hand, inwards with that non-dominant hand. So you want this heel of the hand on the flat side of the back of the cone. I like for the non-dominant angle of the thumb muscle to go into the M on your dominant hand. From there, elbows still braced, applying downward pressure with that dominant top hand. There is a method where you can apply pressure forwards as well. The cone will bend forward, push down into the rest of the cone. That is just to show you that we're seriously trying to go forward. We want the pressure to go away from your body towards the center of the wheel. You pushing towards the center of the wheel with the centrifugal force of the wheel, that is what is going to center the clay. That inward pressure as well as that downward pressure. Now, we want to make sure that we're taking the clay that we're collecting at the top in our hands, we're taking that all the way down to the base of the wheel. If you stop halfway through, you're not done. We are trying to get the lump of clay that's collecting down to the bottom of the wheel until we have what resembles a hockey puck shape. Now that we have it into a puck, you can cone up again if you feel like you need to. Do not cone up again without first applying an equal amount of pressure downwards and inwards at the same time. So kind of giving your clay a big squeeze from both hands. You want to go in with the same amount of pressure and down with the same amount of pressure. We don't want it too flat. We don't want it too high. We want it to be even. Less like a square. I know even makes it kind of sound like we want a square, but more so we want it to be a little bit wider than it is tall, but we're not looking for something flat. When I say hockey puck, I mean it. It's like literally the shape and proportion of a hockey puck. So that even pressure inwards and downwards, that big squeeze is what's going to center your clay. All right, those are the steps. Now I'm going to get into mistakes you're making or things you could be doing that are stopping your clay from getting centered, or maybe you're just not finished and you think you're finished and you're not finished. That's the majority of it. Number one, you're not using enough water. It is very important throughout this whole process that you are using enough water for the surface to remain slick. While the clay is moving, you need the right amount of lubrication in order for your hands to remain slippery, in order for there to be no friction. You want lubrication throughout this entire thing. If you feel like your clay is drying up, just slowly release. If you release quickly, it can mess up what you're doing. Your cone can go wobbly. If you're applying pressure and you release quickly, that will knock it off center as well. So slowly releasing, taking your sponge, wetting your clay, just enough for the surface area to be covered, wetting your hands as well. If you just wet your hands, dry clay will soak up the water in your hands in a heartbeat. So wetting your clay is how you keep it wet for longer. I like to periodically clean my hands in my water so that I don't develop a lot of clay or slip on my hands. Just because we're working with dirt doesn't mean that we have to be dirty. So applying enough water, especially when we're coning up. If you're coning up and you do not have water, it can stick to your palms. It will stay stationary and the wheel will keep spinning and the clay will twist off and detach, and you'll have your clay in your hands and half of it on the wheel, and then you'll be like, well, what the hell just happened? So lubricate frequently. It is possible to over lubricate. So like I said, just enough to cover the surface area. Once it dries up, put it back. While we're on the topic of water, this is before we even get our clay on the wheel, making sure that when you throw the clay down onto the wheel is dry. You can do your little like pass over with the sponge. That's so satisfying to do, but make sure that your sponge is wrung out. There's no water in it when you do that, so that there's no remaining water. It can be moist, it just can't be soaking wet. If you throw it down with soaking wet water, it will not stick. The next thing is not using non-dominant hands. So remember, our non-dominant hand is in this L shape. We're using the heel of our hand to push away from our body. If you are not applying the pressure with that hand, pushing inwards towards the center, it will not get centered. Even if your hand is touching, it might not be applying enough pressure in order to center the clay. So you're applying this downward pressure with your dominant hand, and then your non-dominant hand is just there, just chilling along for the ride, not participating, then there's consequences. Your clay will not be centered. So make sure you're actively pushing towards the center of the wheel with that heel of your hand to get that clay centered. That's where we're applying the even amount of pressure from the top and the side. Another problem you could be having is the shape of your puck. When the shape of the puck has points at the top. To fix this, very simple, non-dominant hand, yay! This girl keeps showing up, she's not gonna leave. Pushing towards the center of the wheel with this hand, your hand must be straight. So when I say your hand is straight, I mean your hand can curve quite a bit. Now that your hand is straight, I want you to drop your thumb muscle. When I say thumb muscle, I mean that bottom part of the thumb that's connected to the palm, not the tip of the thumb. We really don't want to use the thumbs in ceramics in terms of applying pressure. So now that we've dropped our thumb muscle, making sure that the bottom half of the hand is still straight, that thumb is what we connect our dominant hand to, our karate chop. We connect to that thumb. That's how you ensure that there's no space in between your two hands. The way people hold their hands, it's very easy for there to be space. And if there is space between those two hands, that is where the clay will go to. So you essentially are making the shape with your hands that you want the clay to be. So ensuring there's no space between those two hands, rounding out that thumb to ensure a rounded curve of the top of the puck, coming down that dominant hand pressure, releasing slowly, boom, centered clay. Release slowly. If you're applying all this pressure, we did all this work, you coned up, you coned down, you know, you think you're doing a great job, that's great. You get so excited, you fling off, you say, woo, I got my centered clay. You look down and it's not centered. That doesn't mean you did the whole rest of the process wrong, that just means you came off too fast. As we're applying all this pressure, an equal amount of pressure downwards and inwards at the same time, you have the shape of the hands right, the weight is stemming from your upper body and your arm muscles being engaged. If that comes off too quickly, or better yet, if you push off of it, all that weight that you're pushing off with is going into the clay and is deforming the clay the actual second you dismount off the clay. When you're applying all this pressure, be conscious of your body weight. Ease up your body weight first and then slowly release your hands. That will reveal whatever is happening underneath your hands, truly, without you messing it up in that last second. Now, if what you see is still not centered, got some more work to do. I'd say cone up a maximum of 3 times. 3 is somewhat unnecessary to me because, as I said before, a majority of the centering happens at that even inward and downward pressure. The only reason I cone up more than once is if my clay is relatively hard and wedging it didn't really loosen it up enough, and coning it up 1 or 2 times will get it more plastic or more fluid than it was before. Now, if you're using reclaim or if you're using a relatively soft clay, you really don't need to cone up more than once. You know, you're coning it up just to get it into the position so that you know where to apply your pressure in order to get it down center. If you have done this a couple times and you know you're using soft clay, don't even bother with coning up. You know what pressure needs to be applied in what directions, and you know, you don't even need to cone up maybe, so that's okay. All right, so hopefully that helped you learn how to center or troubleshoot any issues that you were having while centering. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful. Let me know if there's any other issues that you're coming across that you're not sure how to fix, and I will potentially make a video about it in the future, or answer you in the comments, or say suck it, figure it out on your own. I wouldn't do that. Not to you. Maybe other people. Thank you for watching my video and spending time with me. And that's it. That's it. Thanks for watching. That's it. Bye.